or I'm excited about this one today. So let's say you have around £20,000 to £35,000 to spend on your first Porsche 911. There's a very good chance it'll be one of these two that you would be considering. In the silver corner, we have a 996 generation 911. This is a facelift model. It's a basic Carrera, so rear wheel drive, 3.6 litre naturally aspirated engine, 6-speed manual gearbox. In the other silver corner, we have an early 997. Again, this is a standard Carrera model, so it's a 3.6 litre. Again, it's a manual gearbox, rear wheel drive. Both lovely cars, but what should be your first 911? In this CarGurus UK video, we are going to see how these cars compare. But first, a big thank you to the excellent Paragon Porsche specialists in East Sussex for loaning us the 997 for this video. You can check out the link in the description to see more of their cars, as well as viewing them on cargurus.co.uk. This other car has been loaned to us by me actually. It is my first Porsche 911. I bought it 18 months ago, still over the moon. And this is a video I've been wanting to make ever since because I think it's a really interesting comparison. So if we look at these cars, we'll start in chronological order with the 996. And the 996 was the car that really transitioned the 911 from its old classic air-cooled model into something that is more akin to what you'll see in showrooms today. So it still has that lovely classic 911 silhouette. It's still rear engine, it's still a 2+2. But it has features that you didn't get in the older cars. So the biggest difference being it has a water-cooled engine, but it also has things like advanced electronic stability systems that you still see in modern 911s. You didn't see in older ones, just the modern ones are obviously much more advanced. Yet at the same time, there remains a key difference between these 996s and today's 911s that connects them just as much with the past as with the future: their size. The 996 and 997 are from an era when Porsche 911s were still quite petite. That's particularly the case in these narrow-bodied forms that we have here today, but actually even the wider-bodied cars still feel wieldy and compact to drive. They're also fairly light, so in this basic Carrera configuration you're looking at around 1300 to 1400 kilograms curb weight for one of these cars. Compare that with even the lightest basic Carrera that you can buy in a Porsche showroom today. It's going to be 1500 kilos plus. And get this, a new 911 is 9 centimeters longer and 9 centimeters wider than one of these. Back to the engine. It's fair to say that not all Porsche fans loved the idea of moving from air cooling to water cooling, which was done to meet noise and emissions legislation. But by most measures, these engines are still stuffed full of character. If you're looking at a 996, there are two basic engine configurations in the Carrera models to be aware of. So earlier cars used a 3.4 litre, they're both flat sixes by the way, because it is a 911 after all, but it's a 3.4 litre with 300 horsepower and it do 0 to 62 in 5.2 seconds. Then in 2002, Porsche facelifted the car and increased the engine to 3.6 litres like in this car. It's another 20 horsepower, it has more mid to low range flexibility, and it cut the 0 to 62 time to 5 seconds. Now it's very easy to tell a facelift car from an earlier car because they changed the headlights as well. So facelift cars like this have the turbo style headlights, earlier cars have what is known as the fried egg design. So as we've said, this car is fairly typical of what you might buy as a first 911. It's a fairly standard specification, manual gearbox. So let's say you do that and you climb in. Is it going to feel special? Are you going to get that buzz of excitement you should from a first 911? Well, one of the things the 996 was often criticised for was the cabin quality not being as good as older 911s. And I mean, I can see that. This car, it's only done 50,000 miles, but it does squeak and rattle a bit on bumpy road surfaces. That said, I think you climb in here, the driving position's great, you have these big 5 dials looking out at you, it still looks, feels and even smells a bit special. The quality of the leather is good, the 5 dial layout is classic 911, and there's enough in the way of mod cons such as a decent stereo, cup holders and climate control for it to be usable on a daily basis. Before we go for a spin, I really want to get the direct contrast with the 997's interior, so let's go and jump in that quickly. Yeah, I mean, this is a quantum leap forward compared with that car. It looks more modern, it feels higher quality, although I guess that's not surprising. Porsche had, what, 7 years of the 996 being on sale, hearing criticisms of its interior, so it had time to plan and to get this one right, you really can see the difference. But what's so clever is the way that it feels a lot more modern, but also has a lot more things that hark back to old 911s. So the 996's interior, you'll see, is quite swoopy, quite curvy. This car has a lot more flat, angular surfaces, which really tie it back to older 911s. And things like the window switches in the 996, they put them down here for the first time. The 997, they put them back on the door handle where they belong. Now, there are still similarities between the cars, so the driving position feels very similar, equally as good in here. You still get these 5 dials staring at you. This car just feels much higher quality and significantly newer. Whether you choose 996 or 997, you'll get the added versatility that comes with having 2 small rear seats, as well as a useful bonnet under the nose of the car. Now, these 2 seats back here might be small, but the difference they make to how much you can use the 911 is huge. So if you've got kids, you can get them back there. You can even get some car seats that will fit in there. And also, if you want to use the car as a GT car and perhaps go touring around Europe, you get not only the storage space under the front, but if you're not using the back seats, you can use them for storage instead. So the inside of the 997 feels significantly more modern, more upmarket. What about the outside? Well, actually at the rear of the cars, there's not as big a difference as you might expect. I think Porsche, they did well with the rear of the 996. I think they struggled a bit with what to do with the front, but that's very classic 911 sort of shape. Same with the 997. The 997 overall just looks a bit more squat and tough, but actually it's at the front where the biggest difference is. It's things like these round headlights and these more pronounced front wings that really tie this car both to older 911s, but also to everything that's come since. Now the 996, on the other hand, is of a much more defined era. It's the moment when the 911 modernised, and I think there's something quite neat in that. It really ties it to that pivotal moment in the 911's history. However, it does look a lot more dated. Now, if I had to choose on looks alone, I would say the 997. Oh, I feel bad for my car. Please don't break down in retaliation. Let it be said that while you may find people who will criticise the 996 for its styling or for its interior, it is less common to find people who have much negative to say about the way it drives, because it still has all that 911 magic. It has the engine working way behind you, it has a beautifully weighted controls, and it has the noise. I mean, just listen to this thing. Yes. So something to think about when looking at a 996 is that because these cars are, 1, pretty old now, and 2, not always have been loved in 911 circles, values did go down quite low at some points. And as such, some people bought 911s who then perhaps couldn't necessarily afford to maintain them in a way that a 911 needs to be. You want to avoid cars like that, not only because they're probably going to feel a bit baggy to drive, not give you quite that 911 buzz that you're looking for, but also because they could be hiding potentially expensive issues. Now, I don't want this video to turn into a deep dive about IMS bearings, rear main seals and bore scoring, because those are the sorts of things that if you're thinking about buying a 996 or an early 997, you should really be doing your own research to make sure you understand the potential for problems and you feel comfortable with it. What I would say though is to make sure you buy a car with a detailed service history and lots of evidence where you can see that money's been spent on it, because those are the sorts of cars that should be cheaper to run and also that are going to hold their value better when time comes to sell. Now, even with all that, it's really important with 911s to understand that the running costs are going to be high. So as an example, I knew when I bought this car that it was going to need a wheel refurb at some point. I knew that it would need new tyres within about the next 12 months, and I knew it was going to need some new rear brakes at some point. And all of that was factored into what I paid for the car, and I had the money put aside to spend on it. Now, even so, it costs about £2,000, which is going to be painful even if you've got the money put aside, and it did feel quite painful to do it. But it was a really important reminder that when it comes to 911 ownership, you do have to be prepared to spend on the general maintenance of the car, because it's by staying on top of all of those things that you can keep longer term running costs in check. The flip side to the high running costs is that, unlike with a new car, you are unlikely to have the considerable cost of depreciation to worry about. Also, unlike with a new car, you'll have a driving experience that feels much more analog and immersive. I talked earlier about how the 996 driving experience was so influenced by its size and its low curb weight, and it really is true. It's such a sharp, exciting car to drive. And it's a proper sports car too, the 996. It's just completely involving. It's the engine, it's just wonderful. It really is. The drivetrain, in fact, the gearbox as well, has a beautifully slick shift action, a nice click between the gears, really, really good. And then the controls, I mean, the steering in this car is lovely. It's hydraulically assisted, it's got loads of feel. And you know, these are, well, this is 18 years old now, this car, but it's still properly quick, you know? It still moves, and it has, you know, even the brakes are good enough to keep up with more modern performance cars. It can do the GT car thing too, and it is comfortable enough over long distances, if a bit noisy in the cabin. But it's the feel you get through the chassis and the controls that really define the 996 not only as a proper 911, but a truly enjoyable driver's car. So, let's hear it go. Yes! It's been a while since I've driven an early 997. And particularly a Carrera rather than a Carrera S. The S, of course, being the model above the Carrera when it was launched. It had a wider body, it had 355 horsepower, and it also had adaptive dampers, which this car doesn't. But you know, I remember doing a magazine test back when these cars were new of Carrera versus Carrera S, and actually a lot of us who were doing the test came away surprised to find ourselves preferring the cheaper Carrera. There was just something in the simplicity of its passive dampers, its narrower body, and the way you had to work its engine that made it feel more connected with older generations of 911, and therefore also somehow more authentic. It really does feel fabulous to drive this thing. More modern, a bit more refined, perhaps a bit more of a GT car than the 996, but still just awesome. Really exciting. And we're still, of course, in the age of hydraulically assisted power steering here rather than electric, and that just helps with feel. So at low speed you get that lovely bit of road feel through the rim of the steering wheel, and then when you go a bit quicker, it just means you can feel the wheel weight up more in your hands as the car loads up. So what about differences in the way this car drives then? Well, actually the engine, same power, I mean, feels very similar in its performance, in its response. I mean, it's just absolutely brilliant. Try not to swear with being too emphatic. But yeah, just mega. Gear lever, however, and the gear shift rather, is meatier, a bit more precise. It's a better gear shift. The brakes, interestingly, I don't think overall stopping power is that different between the 996 and the 997, but what you do notice is that the initial response in the 997, they have a lot more assistance at the top of the pedal, so you don't need to push them as hard, which is another one of those things that makes it feel more modern to drive. Comfort and ride quality, there's not much in it. This car's on 19s versus my car's 18s. You do feel a bit that it's a bit stiffer, particularly at lower speeds and bumpier roads, but there's really not much in it. They're both pretty comfortable for such focused sports cars. So in terms of the car's major controls, we say it's got a better gear shift, the brakes more responsive, steering is brilliant in both of the cars. There are some differences, but actually it's in the minor controls as well, where the 997 just feels so much more modern. You know, the quality and the consistency with which all of these different things move, all the buttons, is a big step forward over the 996. Although why I'm talking about what the buttons feel like when I could be enjoying this flat six. It's interesting driving this car, you know. I had been a little bit apprehensive, I'm going to admit, that it was going to make my car feel really a bit old and it's not quite as special. Now, don't get me wrong, the 997, I think it is better to drive, and I like that it feels more modern, but the 996 still feels awesome. I still would quite happily get in that knowing that I was going to have a really great drive. They're both just fantastic. I mean, wow. Fantastic. You know, it is highly unlikely you'd be disappointed with either of these cars as a first 911. They are both fabulous, and having them together today has really helped to crystallize the differences, whether it's the exterior styling, the interior, or the way they drive. And you know, where I think I've landed is this. These are both fantastic modern classics, that is, cars that are modern enough to be used every day but still have classic car appeal. It's just the ratio of modern to classic that's different. If you want a 911 that has the feel of a motoring era that's now past, the 996 is for you. It can still be used daily if that's what you want to do, but it also has that raw edge to it that gives it more of the feel of a classic car. If, however, you really want something that feels more modern while still giving you so many of the things that make the 996 so engaging to drive, then an early 997 is a great option. If you do land on a 997, then do not ignore these entry-level Carrera models. They are just so compelling. They're fabulous things. But we did say we would make a recommendation for the best first 911, so here it is. And this is really hard for me because obviously I did choose a 996. The thing to remember is history and provenance. So you buy whatever car your budget will go to with the best history and the best provenance, and buy it from a specialist that you trust. That is the most important thing, and then it comes down to budget. So for me, all of those things and my budget meant a 996 was what I was going to end up with. If I could stretch to it, then it is a better car, and I would say 997. Thanks again to Paragon Porsche for the loan of their 997. Please do remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications by ringing the bell icon.